So I figured I did Babylon 5 this week, so I might as well go a bit further. And in addition to Babylon 5, cover Deep Space Nine. Now, I'm not going to talk about the whole controversy as to whether or not Deep Space Nine copied Babylon 5. I think it did to a certain extent, but it doesn't really matter much to me because they deal with very different issues. Babylon 5 deals with more metaphysical issues and I guess kind of questions about the nature of reality and kind of abstract concepts, while Deep Space Nine more kind of deals with political issues in a way that other Star Trek series before it and after it never did. As a show, Deep Space Nine is weird. It's kind of both the best and worst Star Trek show. The character depth, the moral issues raised, and the acting and just some other things are by far the best of a Star Trek series. But the actual show has really strange pacing. It kind of has this odd presence to it. There's a lot of just kind of useless side stuff with like Quark and people drinking, and a lot of the show doesn't really have anything to do with the plot. Also, the characters, while well thought out, are just kind of weird. It's kind of hard to describe it other than saying it kind of has this strange. It's hard to describe the presence. Maybe I'll do a video on it, but it's just kind of this excruciating B quality aspect to it. But I would recommend watching some videos about the Dominion War, as it's by far the best thing the Star Trek series ever produced. So I think I've rambled on long enough. Let's start talking about Deep Space Nine. So before we get into the plot of Deep Space Nine, let's just talk a bit about the background. So the Cardassian Union has, at this point in history, emerged as a major galactic power. The Cardassian Union, I'll just go into a slight bit of detail about, is they're probably the least known of the major species in Star Trek. The Cardassians have a totalitarian military government in which basically all citizens are expected to live and die solely in the interest of the Cardassian state. They're extremely expansionist, radically xenophobic, and as opposed to the Romulans or Klingons, who are also xenophobic but will integrate conquered species as kind of like second-class citizens, and the Federation, who gives full citizenship to integrated species. The Cardassians tend to use them as slave labor or just exterminate them. Sometime before the beginning of the series, Cardassia had occupied the planet of Bajor. And I know probably some of my viewers will roll their eyes at this, but Bajor is kind of a analogy for the Holocaust. The Bajorans were a deeply religious people who worshipped the prophets, who were a group of divine beings that lived in a wormhole. Yeah, just go with it. And they conquered their planet. They basically raped it, took their resources, and attempted to exterminate the population over time to make it ready for colonization. So that happened. There was also that, and a number of other atrocities and territorial disputes led to a war between the Federation and the Cardassian Union. And this is kind of where we start to get to one of the core themes of Deep Space Nine, which is we kind of start to see for the first time the flaws in the way the Federation works. What's required, I think probably the most present theme is what's required to keep the Utopia going. We're always told that the Federation's a utopia, that Star Trek has produced this utopian future where everything's solved. But we kind of start to see behind the scenes, what does it take to maintain this? What are the costs necessary to maintain this? And one of the kind of downfalls of the Federation, as you can see in this map, despite being basically the size of all the other major powers combined, its armed forces are quite pathetic given its relative size. There's a couple different reasons for this. Probably the most notable one is Starfleet will not produce warships. They refuse to, and even when they start producing them, they refuse to call them warships. So instead, what they do is most ships that Starfleet or the Federation produces are general purpose ships like the Enterprises. Now, these ships are massive, and they're more than a match for the warships, even the cruisers of other major powers. At the same time, the Enterprise or Voyager or whatever takes hundreds of people to man them. A Klingon warbird only takes, I think it's 16 people as a full crew, and they can manage with 6 or 8 people. And Romulan ships are similar, and they just are much cheaper to produce. They're mass producible, whereas Federation ships are much less so. And so it's just an inefficient use of resources. They also, despite their advanced technology, they just aren't very well optimized. Eventually, when they produce the Defiant, it blows most opposing ships out of the water. But their lack of a standing navy, their lack of proper military ships, meant that even though the Cardassian Union was substantially less technologically advanced, they were able to fight them to a standstill and both sides were taking huge casualties. So what wound up happening was the territory they were fighting over was kind of split in half, and half was given to the Cardassian Union and half was given to the Federation. And the human colonists in the area were made to disassemble their settlements, and they became the Maquis. And the Maquis were basically freedom fighters, terrorists, whatever you want to call them. And they believed that the Federation had sold them out. And so they conducted their own guerrilla war against the Cardassians. And it became an ongoing kind of embarrassment for Federation command. And the the Klingons started to arm them. And basically that's kind of an example of the whole what was necessary to maintain the Federation's utopia and avoid total war was selling out millions of its citizens. And then eventually the Federation intervened to kind of wipe out the Maquis, even though over time a lot of sympathizers in the Federation were also supporting them and sending them resources. So while all of this is happening, some people go through the wormhole. The wormhole is on the border of Cardassia and the Federation, and it leads to the Gamma Quadrant. The universe in the Milky Way galaxy is divided into 3 parts: the Alpha, Beta, Delta, and Gamma Quadrant. The Gamma Quadrant is mostly controlled by an empire known as the Dominion. The Dominion was founded 10,000 years ago by the Founders. The Founders are a race of changelings. They can change their bodies at will. They can change into any solid, liquid, or gaseous element. And they're biologically immortal. Most of them exist on a planet in a massive sea called the Great Link. And because solids are suspicious of them because they can change their form, they founded the Dominion with the goal of forcing all solids to go under their rule and to bring order to the universe. So they created their own species, the Jem'Hadar, which could be grown in vats in a number of days, and who were chemically dependent upon Ketracel White and worshipped the Founders as the gods. They also created the Vorcha, who were a species of kind of backstabbing administrators who also worshipped the Founders as gods. And once they saw an opening to the Alpha Quadrant, they began to plan an invasion, seeing it as a good opportunity to expand their reach to another side of the universe and destroy the solid empires that in that place. It's implied that the Dominion has conquered thousands of species and subject them to their twisted version of order. So, because the various Alpha Quadrant powers do some scouting into the wormhole, and they discover that the Dominion is larger than all of them combined, and that it has virtually limitless numbers of ships and soldiers, and that through sheer weight of numbers it could easily conquer the entirety of the various Alpha and Beta Quadrant powers. So this is kind of where we start to get into the end of Utopia. The Federation has built its society based on democracy, human rights, pacifism, science, enlightenment. So they're being faced with an opponent, not just like the Borg, because the Borg are kind of mindless destruction, but an opponent that doesn't have any of their weaknesses, doesn't have an opposition to military force, isn't pacifist, isn't all like airy-fairy, let's just all get along type thing, but who actively wants to defeat them, and unlike the Romulans and the Klingons, actually has the resources to do so. So how the various Alpha Quadrant powers react to it is interesting. The Cardassian Union and Romulan Star Empire take the approach that since the Dominion's going to invade eventually, what they need to do is launch a preemptive strike. So the Cardassians and the Romulans get a fleet together of their special, the Tel Shiar and the Obsidian Order, which are kind of like their secret police, and they get a huge armada of ships together with cloaking devices, and they go through the wormhole. And going through the wormhole, they attempt to destroy the Founder's home planet, basically with nuclear warheads, which will kill all the changelings. But the changelings had moved planet at the last moment, and those groups get destroyed. And that's kind of one of the first questions. Is it justified for them to commit a preemptive genocide against the Founders? Starfleet would say no. Starfleet would say no, we can't do genocide at any state. But other people would argue, and we'll get to this a bit later, the Founders are basically one mind. In their natural state, they aren't individuals. They exist as the Great Link. And the Great Link is collectively going to declare war on the Alpha Quadrant and basically reduce them all to slave states of the Dominion. So is it really that bad to try to wipe them out? So around this time, we realize that the Changelings have kidnapped and replaced numerous officials throughout the Alpha Quadrant. Government officials, scientists, people in positions of power, and they start to manipulate the various powers to go to war against each other. In the Cardassian Union, in the wake of the Obsidian Order getting wiped out when they try to attack the Founder homeworld, the Civilian Council reasserts itself and overthrows the military government. The Klingon Empire assumes that Cardassia has been taken over by changeling infiltrators, which is reasonable, and they begin a war with Cardassia. Eventually, the Federation gets pulled into this war against the Klingons, seeing them as a violent expansionist power, and we have a war between three of the Alpha Quadrant powers caused by the changelings. And a bunch of different things just kind of occur. The Romulans, being cunning like they are, stay out of it. But the Cardassians basically get utterly destroyed in the war, and they're reduced to a third-rate power. Being incapable of ever matching, at least in the foreseeable future, the other great powers on their own, their leader Dukat appeals to the Dominion and offers to have Cardassia join the Dominion in exchange for large territorial gains throughout the quadrant and to restore the country to its former greatness. So, because of this, the Dominion starts to come through the wormhole. Massive fleet after massive fleet begin to come through it, and it's pretty clear that within a couple weeks, the Dominion will have enough troops to back Cardassia and take over the rest of the Alpha Quadrant. So what are they going to do? Are they going to launch a preemptive attack on an opponent that hasn't directly attacked them yet? Are they going to do that? True changelings have been infiltrating their government, and they caught a number of them. But is that worth going to war over? And so what the Federation winds up doing is they mine the entrance to the wormhole. And they state that they will not allow any more Dominion ships to enter the Alpha Quadrant. So it's once again we're kind of seeing these decisions they're having to make to preserve their utopia, things they don't want to do. They're having to take offensive positions. They're having to pull things like this. And what eventually it comes out is that Section 31, I think it's called. Section 31, which is kind of the Federation's Black Ops, had, through Odo, who's a changeling on their side, implemented a virus among the founders. And the virus they gave to the founders will kill them within a decade or so. So all the changelings are dying, and Starfleet and Section 31 had this as their ace in the hole, that regardless of what happened during the war, the founders would be wiped out and the Dominion would collapse, and all the Federation really needed to do was to survive long enough to win by default. They also had the idea that the cure could be used as a way to broker an emergency peace if they were losing the war. So everybody, when this happens, everybody just freaks out about it. They call the tactics abhorrent when they discover it. Everyone just acts really offended and is like, oh, how could they say something? How could they do something like that? How could they commit genocide? How could they use biological warfare? But in the end, it's what they actually use. Because when the Dominion's clearly defeated, they decide to basically just kill as many civilians as they can with weapons of mass destruction, and have all remaining true forces of their armada just completely wreck the other people's fleets. And they use the bribe of the antidote to get them to surrender and leave the Alpha Quadrant and give up on their conquest. So they can yell all they want at Section 31, but they're the ones who saved their way of life. So to maintain their utopia, they had to flirt with genocide. Even just looking so far, they've had to flirt with genocide. They've had to take preemptive wars. In a couple cases, they had to sell out allies. But then once the war starts to get going, just going back a bit, they're rapidly getting destroyed by the Cardassian Union and the Dominion, and the Klingons are starting to lose the war as well. So Sisko, who's kind of the main character, he and a guy named Garrick, who is an exile, a Cardassian exile, they kind of concoct a plan together. The Romulan Star Empire has forged a treaty with the Dominion, a non-aggression pact, and the Romulan Star Empire has a huge advanced navy. Their navy's probably about the size of the Klingon Empire's, but much more modern and much better run. Also, they haven't participated in a major war in centuries, so their army is completely fresh, and they haven't been involved in any other wars, so they have to bring them in. So Sisko invites the senator who signed the non-aggression pact to come to Deep Space Nine, and he tries to convince him to join the war. The senator basically goes, look, you guys are getting destroyed. You're obviously losing the war. I'm not going to bring my nation into it at this point in time where we're just going to get completely destroyed. I mean, obviously there's the issue that probably in the long term the Dominion will wipe them out anyways. But the Romulans may just be biding their time and attack everybody at the end of the war when everyone's exhausted. So what Sisko does is he basically falsifies a data rod recording of a meeting of top-level Dominion officials, and he gives it to the senator and is like, the Dominion officials are discussing the invasion of Romulus. And they're like, look, they're planning to invade you. They're planning to break the non-aggression pact. So when the senator discovers that it's a fake, we get the famous scene where he goes, it's a fake. And then he leaves. And when he leaves, he's going to recommend the Romulan Senate to join the war on the side of the Dominion because Starfleet double-crossed them. So what winds up happening is Garrick planted a bomb on his shuttle and he blows it up. So the senator dies, and the data rod is still intact enough to read the message off of it. At the same time, though, any of its imperfections are blamed on damage. So the Tel'Shar investigates the whole thing. It looks like that a Romulan senator was killed when he discovered when he got secret information that Dominion was planning an invasion. And when the Dominion denies it and tries to cover it up, they look increasingly guilty because it's the sort of thing the Romulans would do. So the Romulans enter the war. And Sisko, when he finds out about all this, punches Garrick. And Garrick says, look, your Federation will be saved. The Alpha Quadrant will be saved. Trillions of people will be saved. And all it cost was the life of one criminal, one senator, and the self-respect of one Starfleet officer. I would say, Sisko, that's a bargain. And then at the end of the episode, we have Sisko kind of staring at the camera saying, the funny thing about this is I think I can live with it. And if I had to do it all again, I would. And then he just repeats kind of ominously, and I can live with it. I can live with it. I can live with it. So ultimately what kind of saves them is doing that, is assassinating someone, is falsifying information, is basically creating, implicating the Dominion in something they didn't do, etc., etc. And all these things go explicitly against Starfleet's code of conduct. And in their utopian society, the Federation would say there's no need for these sort of things. There's no need for an actual military. There's no need to be aggressive against people. There's no need for falsehood or lies or to ever compromise our principles. And as the war drags on, more and more things like that happen. There's an attempted coup on Earth by an admiral, and his attempt at a coup is widely supported by the population of Earth, who are tired of weak and ineffectual leadership, and they want more security, they want more commitment to the war, and they want more of the gloves taken off. And the Federation seems to be buckling the fastest, despite the fact that it has the most resources, because the people within it are just not really willing to sacrifice as much as any of the other great powers are to kind of continue the war. And we just kind of see this theme again and again throughout it, that the only times the Federation actually gets anywhere is when they're willing to overlook aspects of, or sidestep aspects of their absolutist philosophy and defend the utopia they've built by any means. So we see like this shadow government in Section 31 that exists behind the scenes and deals with the issues that the Federation Council won't deal with. We see officers in the field making decisions that are unethical and go against everything the Federation claims to stand for, being necessary for it to for their utopia to continue. And this is kind of a recurrent theme throughout Star Trek that's often played in the background. It's kind of implied that the Federation repressed or destroyed the various world religions. It's kind of implied that a lot of the cultures that join are put through the Federation blender, and that they kind of just impose liberal human culture and liberal human democracy on societies that don't really want it. And that's kind of the issue when you're going to have a pacifist society that is completely idealistic and is unwilling to even have a proper military, is you're going to need people within that society who aren't bound by excessive degrees of self-restraint to deal with these issues when you cannot. And that's merely one of the issues that they deal with. There's a lot of other kind of interesting things that happen in Deep Space Nine. There's a Cardassian file clerk who gets plastic surgery and tries to make himself look like a great Cardassian war criminal. And he impersonates him because he wants the Bajorans to execute him because he feels such immense guilt for the war that he feels that he escaped the punishment he deserves. He describes himself as being a man who huddled under his bunk and cried because he couldn't take the screams of pain. And he also feels that unless his people acknowledge how brutal and horrific they've become, they can never begin to heal. Another great episode, and probably my favorite Star Trek episode of all time, is Gul Dukat and Sisko are stranded on a planet. And Gul Dukat, as the former governor of Bajor, wants Sisko's approval and respect. So he demands that they have a trial. They have a trial for him. And Dukat tries to justify his actions by saying, when I was leader, the death rate decreased in the slave camps. I got rid of child labor, etc., etc. And as it kind of goes on, he kind of comes to the conclusion that his acts of mercy are what kind of screwed him. And that if the Bajorans, if the Cardassians have just killed every last Bajoran, they would have gotten away with it and they never would have had to leave. Which is an issue that's often explored in real life. Like if the British and Boers had have just killed every last South African, then they probably would have gotten away with it and no one would care today. So it leads to this amazing megalomaniacal rant where he talks about building a tower of skulls, the likes of which the universe has ever seen, and how he should have killed every last one of them, which is just an emotional scene, and he's a great actor. So there's just a lot of other interesting things. This is a series that deals a lot more with religion than a lot of the other ones. There are the prophets, who are kind of a series of god saints that live within the wormhole and watch over Bajor. And there's also an evil group of them called the Pow Race. And Sisko becomes the agent of the prophets. And he has to kind of focus on fulfilling his will, kind of his duty to heaven, and balance that with the duty of the being a Starfleet officer. And the prophets and Pow Race control the wormhole. And when the prophets are in power, they've closed the wormhole to prevent the Divinian from bringing in more troops, and the Pow Race do the opposite thing. And so the last episode ends kind of with Sisko and Dukat having like basically both dying as they attempt to stop one another from having their gods take power. So it talks about religion a lot more than previous ones are. It seems like religion's not quite as dead in the Federation as one might think. But just kind of everywhere in this, we see kind of a moral complexity to people you don't see in other Star Trek shows. You see the frustration with people losing and the willingness of people to kind of start to jettison some of their more unrealistic values. And frequently the people who do this say, I'm doing this in defense of freedom. I'm going to perform this coup so we can defeat the Dominion and we can return to our state of freedom. I'm doing this to protect the Federation and Federation citizens. And some people accept that and accept that sometimes you have to make sacrifices for the greater good. And sometimes you have to compromise on your principles to in order to preserve some of them. And other people don't. And in the other Star Treks, no one ever compromises on anything. And that's kind of what makes Deep Space Nine unique. It also is unique that they're faced with such a difficult situation that they really have to look at themselves and kind of question everything they've done. So that's kind of an overview of Deep Space Nine. I tried to cover some of the core themes. I hope people enjoyed it, and I'll talk to you later.